What is up, Oak Life Familia? Chris and Greg and Chris back at it yet again with another kind of refurbished Roots and Branches. Glad to be back.
Yeah.
And as you can see, we're going to be talking about the stages of faith. So, what is Roots and Branches anyway? If you were with us during the pandemic, you might remember that this was one of our efforts to stay engaged virtually as much as possible and continue the conversation beyond Sundays. So, any topics that came up either in the community or during a sermon conversation series, we would expand upon it a little bit during Roots and Branches. Sometimes we'd interview people, sometimes it'd just be Chris and Greg and Chris, Chreg riffing out on some conversation topics. So today we're going to, again, bring back Roots and Branches, and we're going to continue the conversation from this past Sunday where we were talking about the stages of faith specifically. So that's enough from me. Any thoughts you want to share, Chris?
That's it. We haven't done this for a minute, so it's good to be back online, which is a weird thing to say after being online for so long. But if there's ever a topic or a question that would be fun to riff out on, or somebody to interview, or anything we can do to just kind of keep conversation going, that's what this space is for. So also, if you are watching live, feel free to drop a question or chat in the comments. So, stages of faith. What do you think? You were there Sunday. I'll say what it was about, and then I'll ping pong it to you. But we on Sundays have been in a conversation called Modern Faith and kind of unpacking what it looks like to hold our faith with honesty and openness to doubts and humility and curiosity. Many of us have come out of backgrounds where faith was talked about, where it was kind of a rigid thing or something you have to have more of, or you have to believe or act a certain way. And maybe the invitation of Jesus is more expansive than that. And so we talked about this model from an author named Brian McLaren, who describes potential stages, kind of an evolution of faith, and invites us to think about the fact that faith can grow and change, and that's part of the process. When we start to lose parts of our faith, I think some of us may have felt fear or insecurity or anxiety around that, because does that mean we're not like a Christian anymore? Does that mean we're not saved anymore, or whatever the fear might be? And so this is a way to look at it that's a little bit more open. So give me your take on like that, what you liked about that concept, what you didn't like about it, and we can get into the weeds of it too a little bit. Like I can pull up the actual stages that McLaren talks about. What's your take? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I definitely love to pull up those and chat through each one and all that. But I just like the concept that has kind of been woven throughout each Sunday conversation around faith, is that the concept of faith seems to be very binary. It's like either you have faith or you don't. And these are all the ways to have it. And if you don't exemplify it in those ways, then you don't have it. And I think there's a space for binary thinking. I think it is limiting. You can't stay there necessarily. So once you have a general understanding of a topic like faith, or fill in that with any other topic, whether it's sport, whether it's a philosophy, or whatever the case is, then you start to realize it's less about one or the other and more about stages. It's kind of like a spectrum, if you will. So it was a good conversation. It had 4 basic elements, and it talked about the flow and the relationship between the 4. And I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of learning, and I think this was a good way to explain faith to someone who is wrestling with that.
Cool. So you'd look at the things and
Let's
then
do it.
talk through them. So, and by the way, so this is borrowed from a book called Faith After Doubt, and McLaren does a good job of setting it up that like this is a structure that may be helpful, and there are lots of other ways to think about this, and it parallels kind of human development and a lot of different processes. And he borrows from psychologists and sociologists, and each kind of transposes it for the faith conversation. But for a lot of us, it helped us kind of reflect on where we've come from and how we relate to people at different stages of their evolution, and even maybe hold it more graciously and with an aspiration that we have a faith that moves us towards harmony and humility. So, simplicity was the first stage. He actually, in the book, he has a stage 0, which is like basic ego,
Mm.
kind of an inability to think beyond yourself. And he parallels that with like early human childhood development, that you're very egotistical as an infant, very self-oriented. It's about you, and then you slowly expand on that over time. But for this, he mostly emphasizes these stages as the most common one. Simplicity is a way of looking at faith like you've arrived at something. I believe this thing. We're right, they're wrong. Our job is to save the world because we're the good guys with the right answer to it all, and we have salvation. And people in that stage are often excited and passionate, and they are highly motivated. Complexity is where you still have that sense of like there's a fundamental right or wrong dualistic kind of way, like, but there might be multiple ways to be right. And you start to realize, okay, well, I'm Presbyterian, but they're Catholic. They're still on the good team, and they're still the bad team over there. Um, and so there's a little bit more openness, but also it's still like kind of rigid. And in this view, he says that most American churches and even global religions are either in stage 1 or stage 2.
Hmm.
So, do you know people in those first two like stages?
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
and um, I feel like the one things that like that I was reflecting on was that, like, I don't think there's something bad to simplicity or the complexity stages. It's like the the posture which you exist in them. So if you're like mean spirited and exclusive and think you're right and everybody else is wrong or less than, those are kind of the
Hmm.
dangers of these stages. It can be harmful. And oftentimes you go through that state, you have to go through that. Um, but the goal is to be more loving and compassionate and not to be like close fisted, like angry at the world, but gracious and open, kind of reflecting the fruits of the spirit and love. Um, yeah, one quick story, and then I was talking to a pastor friend, and I've seen a parallel story with lots of people, maybe including myself. But he was telling me his faith story, and he worked on Wall Street in New York City, didn't have a faith background at all, was living a fast and hard life, and it was destroying him basically. And he was kind of living under the assumption that meaning in life came from uh, getting more money, being successful, having lots of romantic partners, and it was like clearly, obviously void of any sort of purpose or meaning or anything that satisfied like the soul, and kind of crashed and burned. Um, and who picked him up? Well, a pretty conservative Christian community that, in the midst of the chaos of where he was coming from, offered clarity and structure. Like, hey, don't do drugs. Drugs are evil. Like, okay, I needed that black and whiteness. Show up to church on Sundays, tithe, do good for the community. Like these very clear um, boundaries and buffers for life, and he needed that. Um, but like training wheels, he didn't feel like he was supposed to stay there, and so he also started to see the cracks in it when he'd ask questions about like, well, there's some like implicit racist stuff in the way you talk about like these people, or how come women can't speak at this church? And I don't know if I agree with that or that squares with my understanding of God. And so as the cracks started to like expand, he needed to move past the training wheels to something a little bit different. But that entered stage 3. Um, so the last thing I'll say here is on the simplicity complexity is like, think often for people it's a season, and some people opt into it. They choose that lifestyle. And I actually think that's a choice that people can make. My only hang up with it is if they force it on others or held in a way that brings harm. Like I think it's okay to choose, for instance, like a monastic lifestyle. Like there's some simplicity with the monastic lifestyle. Like I'm celibate, I live in this monastery. Here's the clear boundaries of my life. Maybe not like theologically. Monastics often tend to be like way more mystical and open in how they think about God, but at least how they live, they needed that structure. So some people need that simplicity. I have friends who converted to Mormonism, and they told me partly they weren't, they weren't like fully on board with the beliefs, but it was the structure of the community that they needed, that they longed for, and so they're comfortable with some of the beliefs that they weren't fully in agreement with. And so again, I think like all sets of Christians do that sort of thing, people of faith, and so I think it's okay to opt in as long as there's space to opt out, creating harm, which it has real danger to do. So I'll stop talking there.
Well, I'm just going to ask you another question, so get ready. What do you think helps a person move from stage 1 and 2 to 3 and 4?
Yeah. Should we talk about stage 3 and 4 first?
Maybe, or at least move
helped?
out of like, because
First
you were saying that you don't think that people should necessarily stay in stage 1 and 2. So what do you think helps them move out of stage 1 and 2?
I think, so people I've experienced either move out of stage 1 and 2 out of pain or like something uncomfortable or challenging. So on one side, maybe more negative way to get to like grow past those, or through like loving, safe relationship and openness to ask questions and pursue life and God as big as God is. And I know people who like got through that complexity, started asking questions, and then were kicked out of their church, or were told they're not really a believer, and so that forces them out. And for other people, I think having just a non-judgmental, safe place to be. A stage 1 and stage 2 community is going to be reactive towards people who challenge the status quo. So I think it's really hard to lovingly evolve past that without there being some sort of break or pain or discomfort, because usually it comes down to an issue or a question or experience or something you disagree with, and that starts the process for a lot of people. That said, I've seen it in relationships. People slowly evolve just by talking with people who are also on a journey or maybe in a stage 3 or 4. I don't know, what do you think? Like, have you seen people move?
No, it's good
Through this.
So I tend to look at things and compare it to something that's like comparable, but not necessarily the same. So without using a martial arts or of the like reference, just drawing. Like when a person is drawing for the first time, if you're going to study anatomy, the fundamental lesson is learning how to draw shapes. You start with circles, you start with squares, you start with rectangles, you start with triangles. And eventually you have to use those shapes, those cylinders, and then they start to get assembled in such a way that looks like the human figure. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
And then
I was just trying something.
Disrespectful, bro. And then long story short is that you move out of drawing the shape into a basic form, into a more detailed form, so on and so forth. But when you step into the process of drawing a circle or a square or a triangle, you have in mind a goal as to why you're doing that basic thing. So one example is if a person is told that, okay, these are the steps, this is the simplistic view of faith, but there is no example around of a stage 2, 3, or 4, then likely people will stay in stage 1. And if the environment and the relationships are loving and there's trust and there's bonds, but all of those relationships are very homogenous, it's just one type of philosophy, there's no growth. So there has to be kind of like a diversity of experience there, which opens up the possibility for pain and discomfort and struggle, but those are the necessary things to move people out. So just kind of landing the plane, I feel like there has to be an example up front of here's why we're drawing the shapes. Here's what a finished product could look like as far as drawing is concerned. Here's some examples, a varied amount of examples, but you start with the basic so that you move to whatever the desired outcome is. So yeah, that's kind of what I think. There has to be some goal as to why are we doing this? What are we moving towards? What's the possibility of faith? And then with that, people will move through the stages.
Which is interesting because I don't know that many stage 1, stage 2 communities that would say, like, this is a goal that is beyond a stage 1 or 2 way of looking at the world or looking at faith.
Mm-hmm.
Which
And
is
that's the
why
problem.
people, they end up having like a contentious relationship or feeling alienated or getting
Mm-hmm.
hurt. I think because part of the simplicity and complexity strengths are you can organize people because there's some fear often behind it and some clarity of like, here's our purpose: save the world. We're the good side, they're the bad side. You can get money and create a system, and so um, when you challenge any sort of system where there's people's, they're invested in it, they're benefiting from it, it's gonna create conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Take a shot at describing stage 3 and 4 from what you how you see
So
it and what you understand.
this is how I envision it. I'll start from here. So simplicity is right here, right? And then complexity is like you're going uphill. It's very hard. Things are not quite easy to grasp. And then you get to perplexity, which is a free fall. You're like, what the heck is happening? Nothing makes sense. There's no grounding. Balance doesn't exist. And then you kind of land into this, oh, okay, I get it, harmony. And then you repeat the cycle, right? So perplexity is where all of the answers are no longer answering the questions. All of the questions are now beyond our experience. They're beyond our understanding. And there's no certainty. Certainty is kind of out the window, hence the term perplexed. And I think that's where most of the growth is. I'd say if I had to quantify it, maybe like, I'm not going to quantify it, but a lot of the growth happens in that perplexity stage. But I think it's also the stage where people give up and they're like, nah, see, everything that I was taught in stage 1 and 2 clearly isn't true. Therefore, this isn't for me. I'm out. And I think it's that sweet spot where if you can stay and find the grounding as you're free falling downhill, then you can land in that, oh, I see why, blah, 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 blah. That's my thought on perplexity. What about you?
That's good. It's like, just hang on a little bit. There's something good coming, but it's after you've gotten familiar with the structure of simplicity and complexity, and then it's all gone. That's a really scary place. And I like your example because for a lot of people, it does feel like a free fall. Like all the stuff I used to believe, I'm like falling down. And there's even language around like the dark night of the soul and the loss
Mm-hmm.
of the old thing, and you haven't really found the new thing yet. And so there's a sense of wanting to go find some new structure or dip out of the process. But if you hang on, there's deeper growth and meaning and connection to God, to others. I think that process allows you to open up rather than
Yeah,
like close down, which I think is like one of the spiritual pursuits, is to be people who are loving and open. Yeah,
100%.
that's good.
It's
So
interesting
how do you
because you
see
use,
harmony? Oh, go ahead.
well, kind of. I think this will kind of answer it. You use the passage Acts 10 where Peter gets the vision, right? And up until that point, the gospel was for the Israelites. It wasn't for the Gentiles. And one could say that in the vision, God was telling Peter, hey, this whole time you've been doing it wrong. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's that they've been doing it wrong. Because as we see earlier in scripture, there's actually specific instruction from Jesus that says, this is not for the Gentiles yet. The time hasn't approached yet. So for now, just stick here. And then at that moment where Peter's kind of given that vision, that's stage 3. He's perplexed. He's like, wait a minute, what is happening? And then it's after he actually kind of lives out, like you said, he hangs on, he has that conversation with Cornelius, then the harmony starts to set in. And it's not that stage 1 and 2 is bad, or that only going to the Israelites and not to the Gentiles is necessarily bad, but it served its purpose and now it's time to move on. It only becomes bad if you stay there, right? So that harmony is when you let go of the things that serve their purpose. They're not bad, they're not good. They had a moment, they're done, and now you're kind of picking up a new thing, so to speak. And the more you do that, the more you kind of live into that harmony. It's like you plant your left foot and that holds you up. That's your balance. And at some point, you got to let go and then shift balance to the right foot. And the more you do that, that kind of harmonious stride is what kind of sets in. So that would be my answer for harmony and humility. It's how
That's
we move
good.
forward in our faith.
Yeah. Where do you think Oak Life as a community is from your pastoral read on the wonderful humans that make up our community?
That's good. I say the majority of our time shifts back between stage 2 and 3. I think there's glimmers of 1 and 4. I think sometimes we will hit a stride, and 1 and 4 can be very, very like synchronous almost. You step into the harmony of, hey, we don't have to have the answers. We can actually live into what this understanding of love seems, and then it feels simple. So we can for sure do that. But there's a lot of people that still have a lot of angst towards the people that hold stage 1 and 2 in high regard. And I think that's an example of complexity and perplexity more so than, oh, I understand that they serve their purpose too. It's like, no, they got to burn. And yeah, so 2 and 3 is what I think. What about you?
That's good. I think it's a good assessment. Yeah, I wonder, because there are certain things. So like the image I get in the harmony humility is that like it's going to be okay. You don't have to make sense of everything. You can rest in God's love, and that's enough. And it's simple, it's profound, it's dynamic. And that's not to say we shouldn't have angst around things that create harm or are morally wrong. And so there's a tension there of like we should reject with a sense of this is right or wrong some things, whether it's like a systemic evil or people just being hateful towards one another and greedy or but there's like there's a both andness there of the resting in the love and it being okay. And I think that's both communal and individual, and I just process it individually. Like I have those moments where I can have reactiveness, but it's coming out of a place of more healing and rest in God rather than out of an unhealed anger or pain or something that's more ego basic. I need you to know that you're wrong rather than like, how can I offer correction and love and see the other person, the thing that's wrong, even that holding it in love and not like, so it's, I think harmony like holds it all in love and wants to work through it with some urgency and care. And I think you might be right. Some of the 2 to 3 community, us being in there, and that's Brian McLaren's thing is like when you're working through this, you might find some harmony, and then you end up your tendencies to make something simple and then be dogmatic, and then you got to realize that's not enough, and then you move through the process over and over. But I think it's like you do it less and less as you go through the process. You're less, or you move more towards openness and love and compassion. Hopefully, yeah, it's good.
It's good, man. It's good.
You got other thoughts there? I can pull up the.
While you're pulling that up, you had made a comment on Sunday about how a typical understanding is that God doesn't change. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And it's like, but when you look at Scripture and then you look at, just the stories within the community, it's like, oh, the perspective of God changes all the time. And I think it's less about God changing and more about us moving through those stages. And I think that when the conversations are such that are diverse and there's evidence of change, that's a good space to be. When the conversations are all kind of groupthink, we all have the answer, then you're stagnant. And I think as a community, there's a couple of There's a couple of churches that I've been at where it was, we were happy, we were harmonious because we all thought the same. I'm curious as to how healthy they're doing right now. Because I know there's some conversations at Oak Life that could challenge one another. So I say that to say there's a tension, but there's also a hope around being in a conversation that is different, that has different aspects, and it's fun. It's fun times.
Yeah, I like what you said there. Oops.
Keep kicking me out, bro. Tell me how you feel.
Sorry. It's been a while since I've run one of these. You had something there that made me think of something and I already lost it.
Disrespect.
Yeah. The challenge of it, the harmony. Yeah. You had said, how did you start that? Your last train of thought?
I was just saying how when some churches have like the general conversation feels harmonious, it's because everyone's thinking the same thing and there isn't a diversity of thought. So there is no challenge, therefore there is no growth, and that becomes stagnant. And then the church moves back into that stage one, whatever stage one is. So I like the fact that there's a bunch of different perspectives. Even I find it awesome that even you and I have different theology angles for certain topics, and I think that's healthy. I think that's what we're supposed to have. That's a sign of a good community, when everyone has difference of opinion but can still coexist. Yeah, that was the thought.
Yeah, it's good. Yep. Yeah, and I remember now because you brought up in that process. You brought up God changing or not changing, and
yeah, that's how I started it. That's right.
Yeah, and I might disagree with you here. I think God is growing too. Like,
I don't. Yeah. I think our understanding of God is what changes. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, and that's a valid, like those are two different perspectives.
Yeah.
There's open theology, open and relational theology is like a term, open theism, and it's that God doesn't necessarily know the future. God is relating to us with the possibilities, the trillions of possibilities that we get to use to exercise with choices every day, and relating as this thing's moving on, that history is still being shaped. And so some of that's like semantics. Like you could say, well,
yeah,
does God's relationship to those things change over time? Like, or is God actually changing? And I see a pattern is all, like the way we are created to potentially grow and evolve, and the way history is still unwritten. Though they're like they say history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. Like there's lessons there. I wonder if God is similar, that the future is still being written with God. Yeah, but that's a fun conversation for another day.
100%.
We're allowed to disagree and not get kicked out of our church.
Right. Amen to that. Amen to that. That's funny.
So here were the closing questions that were just reflection questions. And I heard from a couple people that there was a sense of at least this first question: do we allow people to be in their faith stages? And hopefully people are on their journey. It's not our job to solve everybody else's faith. And somebody said, like, it helped me relate to family members who are stage 1, stage 2. They may not change. Yeah. So is that okay? Thinking about how our faith has changed and evolved. I know mine has. Thinking about how we see communities in different stages, and what would it look like if more faith communities had a hope to move towards harmony and humility. And this is the question that I was thinking about a lot this week: does our faith expression feel expansive enough to hold the messiness of the world in hope and love? And that's where I think stage 1 and stage 2, the challenge often comes, is like you bump up against an experience that you can't fit into your paradigm. And so then you or a person, like, oh, you believe something totally different than me and have a different view of God. Like, my brain doesn't know how to compute that with my worldview. So I'm just going to dismiss you or explain you away. And the world is very messy and oftentimes very painful. And I think the movement towards a harmony and love is that like it can hold it. We don't have to have the answer, but we can be present and love and have hope too that God's with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any last thoughts, Pastor Greg?
No, that's it, man. Just don't disrespect me anymore, bro. That's it.
What are you talking about? Where'd you go, Greg? I'm just kidding.
Blatant disrespect. No, it's funny.
Disrespect.
No, that's good, man. Disrespect. But no, that's good, man. That's good. There's so many different angles we could go. Like you're talking, I'm thinking of like attachment theory and how we respond to conflict, because that dismissive response is totally one that I find resonant, and I have some friends that do the opposite and they get hypervigilant. And yeah, there's some good conversations to come. But I want to hear what you all think, good people of Oak Life. If you are watching this later, drop a comment with some conversation topics that you want to hear or be a part of even. We will do this not necessarily with any expected cadence, but you'll see more conversations from Chreg via the R&B channel for sure. But that's it. That's all I got. Close us out. Take us home.
Bye, everybody. Peace out.
All right, peace. Oh yeah, this is brought to you in part by Freedom Story. You have blue bottom, black top. I have black bottom, blue top. What are we doing? Get out of here. Get out of here. Love y'all. Peace.
I ain't got a hope.